Lieutenant Robert Bob Fairbanks stood outside the colonel's office with a furrowed brow. The letter he'd received a week ago was highly unusual. You have been selected for a special unit. Your artistic skills are required for a classified operation. Bob was an advertising illustrator from New York before the war, not a combat soldier. He'd never even fired a weapon in battle. Inside the room, he found a group of equally confused men. A Broadway set designer, a fashion designer, a street artist, even a sound effects expert from Hollywood. Colonel Harry Reeder, a stocky man with sharp eyes, stood before them with a mysterious smile. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice low and serious, "you haven't been called here to fight with bullets. You'll fight with illusion. We're going to teach you how to create fake soldiers, fake tanks, even fake divisions, and make the Nazis believe they're all real. Welcome to the Ghost Army." The room fell silent. Then someone laughed nervously. "You're joking, sir? I've never been more serious in my life, Private. Your illusions will save thousands of real lives." For 3 months, Bob and 1,100 other men underwent the strangest training in military history. They learned to inflate giant rubber tanks, perfect replicas of Shermans and Stuarts from a distance, yet light enough to be carried by 2 men. They practiced setting up wooden cannons painted to perfection, creating fake tank tracks in mud with special rollers, even sewing uniforms with different division insignias. In a massive warehouse, sound technicians from Hollywood taught them to operate huge speaker systems that could play recordings. The rumble of tanks, the march of thousands of boots, the sound of trucks moving equipment. "These sounds must be perfect," said Technician Johnson, a former sound engineer from Warner Bros. "The Germans have microphones on the front lines. They're listening to every detail." Bob was assigned to the visual unit, the team that would create visual illusions. He learned principles of perspective on a grand scale, how to make things look real from enemy reconnaissance planes, how light and shadow could deceive the eye. It was like creating the world's largest theater stage, where the audience was the Nazis. And if they didn't believe the performance, people would die. 2 weeks after D-Day, the Ghost Army received its first mission. The 2nd Infantry Division needed to be moved secretly for a surprise attack. The Ghost Army's task: make the Nazis think the division was still in its old position. In the middle of the night, under the threat of German artillery, Bob and his team worked quickly. They inflated rubber tanks with hand pumps, arranging them in convincing formations. The tanks looked ridiculous up close, like giant toys, but from the air or through binoculars at a distance, they were perfect. Meanwhile, the sonic team positioned large speakers in nearby woods, playing recordings of engine rumbles, shouting voices, the sounds of equipment being moved. They even broadcast fake radio transmissions, with codes they knew the Nazis would intercept. Messages about the division's movements that no longer existed. When dawn broke, Bob stood on a hillside, gazing at their tank farm. From a distance, with the thin morning fog, it looked like a massive armored force. "My God," he whispered, "this actually works." 3 days later, Allied intelligence intercepted German communications. They still believed the 2nd Infantry Division was in its old position. The surprise attack succeeded. Hundreds of lives were saved. After the first success, requests for the Ghost Army poured in. But the next operation was the most ambitious: create an entire fake armored division to divert attention from Patton's real attack. Bob and his team worked with unprecedented intensity. They created hundreds of rubber tanks, dozens of fake cannons, even built dummy fuel depots visible from German reconnaissance planes. But this wasn't just about physical equipment, it was about selling a story. They created dense fake radio traffic, radio operators pretending to be different division commanders, sending messages about troop movements, supply problems, reconnaissance. Sergeant Ted Harris, a former radio actor from Chicago, was masterful at this. He could mimic the speech patterns and communication habits of different commanders perfectly. In nearby towns, Ghost Army members wore different division patches each day, ate at local bars, talked loudly, but not too loudly, about their newly arrived units. They even arranged small convoys that drove back and forth on the same roads, the same trucks, different drivers, creating the illusion of massive movement. A local OSS agent reported, "Local Nazi informants have already sent reports about a new armored division to Berlin. They've swallowed it hook, line, and sinker." Not all operations went smoothly. In Luxembourg, while setting up a fake tank farm near the front lines, a German patrol suddenly attacked. They were closer than they should be, too close. Bob and 2 team members, Private Eddie Stein and Corporal James Wu, found themselves trapped among their rubber tanks. They could hear Germans talking no more than 50 meters away. If the Nazis discovered the rubber tanks, the entire operation and the Ghost Army's identity would be blown. "Don't move," Eddie whispered, a graphic artist from San Francisco. "Don't even breathe hard." Seconds felt like hours. A German soldier walked past a tank, his hand nearly touching the rubber. The full moon cast sharp shadows, too sharp. Bob watched a German stop, head tilted, staring at a tank suspiciously. Then, boom. US artillery fired salvos from positions far behind them, part of a larger operation. The Germans shouted, retreating quickly, seeking cover. They didn't have time to inspect the tanks. When the sounds subsided, Bob collapsed to the ground, trembling. "Too close," he gasped. "Too damn close." James smiled weakly. "But they didn't find us, did they?" The show must go on. Spring 1945, the Allies prepared to cross the Rhine, the last natural barrier before the heart of Germany. This was the crucial moment. The Germans would defend it at all costs. The Ghost Army received their biggest mission: make the Nazis believe 30,000 troops would cross at one location, while real forces crossed 10 miles away. This required all their tricks. Bob and his team worked 20-hour days. They created fake forests from camouflage netting and paint, hiding actual preparations. They built fake bridging equipment, rafts and boats that looked real from the air but were actually just plywood and canvas. Most brilliant was the sonic team. They recorded the sounds of actual bridge construction, hammers, drills, heavy trucks, then played the recordings at the fake location at tremendous volume. The Nazis could hear it from across the river. They must be preparing, the Nazis thought. To add authenticity, the Ghost Army even made small mistakes, letting some fake tanks be not quite fully hidden, ensuring German reconnaissance planes saw activity at the fake location. Colonel Reeder walked among the rubber tanks on the night before the operation, gazing at his team's masterpiece. "You know," he said to Bob, "in the future, they might not believe we did this. They'll think it's too crazy to be real." "Maybe that's what makes it work, sir," Bob replied. "Too crazy to believe, so the enemy believes it." The night of the crossing arrived. At the fake location, the Ghost Army created a symphony of deception. Lights turned on and off, simulating activity. Sounds echoed across the Rhine. Radios crackled with dense fake traffic. At the real location, 10 miles away, actual forces began crossing in darkness and relative silence. Bob stood at an observation post with binoculars, looking toward German positions. He could see artillery flashes aimed at the Ghost Army's location, not the real crossing. "It's working," he whispered in awe. "My God, it's actually working." All night, German artillery pounded the fake position. They sent troops to defend the wrong point. Meanwhile, in darkness, thousands of Allied soldiers crossed the Rhine with far lighter resistance than expected. By morning, when the Nazis realized they'd been deceived, it was too late. Real bridges had been built. Real tanks had crossed. The Rhine defense line had been breached. The surviving German commander would write in his report, "We were deceived by a highly convincing demonstration. Our intelligence was completely wrong about the location of the main attack." When the war ended in Europe, the Ghost Army had conducted over 20 major operations. They helped save an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 lives through their deceptions. But no one would know. On VE Day, while other soldiers cheered and celebrated, the Ghost Army received different orders. Everything they'd done was classified top secret. They couldn't talk about it to anyone, not even family, not even fellow veterans. Bob stood among the rubber tanks being deflated for the last time, watching the strangest war art in history being dismantled and burned. All evidence was destroyed. The Ghost Army had to remain ghosts. "It doesn't seem fair," Eddie said, standing beside him. "We helped win this war, and no one will ever know." "Maybe that's the price," Bob replied quietly. "The most perfect illusion is one that's never revealed." They returned home with the same medals as other soldiers, but without stories they could share. At family gatherings, when people asked, "What did you do in the war?" they smiled and said, "Oh, routine stuff. Nothing too interesting." For 50 years, the Ghost Army remained secret. Many original members died without ever being able to tell their story. But in 1996, the documents were finally declassified. Bob Fairbanks, now 76 years old, a retired graphic designer, sat in his living room in Connecticut, holding a newspaper. The headline read, "Declassified, the Ghost Army that fooled Hitler." His phone rang incessantly. Reporters, historians, other Ghost Army members who, like him, could finally speak. There were tears, laughter, and memories overflowing after being held for half a century. His granddaughter, 12-year-old Jennifer, read the article with wide eyes. "Grandpa, you did all this? With rubber tanks and recorded sounds? Like a giant magic show?" Bob laughed, his first genuine laugh in weeks since his wife had passed. "Yes, sweetheart, the biggest magic show ever, and our audience was Nazis who were very, very angry when they learned the trick. "That's the coolest thing I've ever heard," Jennifer exclaimed. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Bob gazed out the window, his eyes misty with memories. "Because the best secrets are the ones you keep. But now," he smiled, "now I can finally tell a story worth telling." Today, in the US Army Museum and other museums, Ghost Army rubber tanks are on display. Giant rubber balloons that saved thousands of lives. Visitors stop, amazed, often disbelieving. In documentaries and books, their story is finally told in full. Artists who became soldiers. Soldiers who fought with creativity, not violence. A unit that proved that sometimes brains are stronger than bullets. At a small memorial in Fort Knox, Kentucky, a bronze plaque reads, "The Ghost Army, 23rd Headquarters. Special Troops, 1,100 artists, designers and sound technicians, 20-plus tactical deception operations, 15,000 to 30,000 lives saved. They fought with imagination and won with illusion." A young boy stands before the plaque, reading carefully. He turns to his father. "So they weren't real soldiers?" His father shakes his head slowly. "No, son. They were very real soldiers. They just fought in a way no one had ever thought of before. And that," he points to the displayed rubber tank, "that proves that sometimes the best way to win a war is not to fight at all, but to make your enemy fight shadows."